So we've now reached the point, we've done our borders, we've done our sashing, we've done our blocks, and now we've got to quilt it. I'm very lucky, I have a long arm quilting machine, so I'm going to be obviously putting it on the long arm quilting machine. I've chosen to do a swirl design in order to highlight the angular squares and triangles. Putting the circles in, I think, gives it a nice big mix and match of different shapes and designs and waves on it. So that's how I've decided to do it. However you decide to do yours, we're really looking forward to seeing it. Make sure you share it on Vlieseline's page. We're looking forward to seeing that. Thread colour that I've chosen is I've chosen a light grey on the front and a light grey on the back. I find grey merges really beautifully within the colorway, but please make sure you choose what you want to use. Black could be a really good color if you're using black as your background color. I just thought that was a bit bold for me. I wanted to have a bit of a softer finish, and yeah, this is how I've been quilting it. So now we have quilted her. You can see we have now got everything ready. Back is done as well. So now we've got to trim it. If you're obviously using a long arm, this is how you would do it. If you're using a machine at home, you may very well end up with this as well. So we're going to give this a good old fashioned trim. Now remember, I put my borders on. These are 6-inch borders, so when you measure them, they're going to be 5 3/4 on here. This is 4.5 inches. So you've then got to make the decision of how big you're going to cut your borders. For myself, I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to make it the same size as this, being 4.5. So you quite simply are going to line your ruler up here on, 4 3/4, because you've got your binding to go on, and you're going to trim this all off and cut it away there. The magic secret we have as long arm quilters is these. Get all the fluffy bits off. So then we're going to do our binding. Binding is really simple. You take your 2.5-inch strips, you put them on the diagonal, you sew them, you trim them off, and then you fold them in half and iron them. Now the way I do my binding is I iron them and I throw this bit all on the floor, and I leave this bit here, and I then just hold my hand here and I roll my binding into a nice big ball. And then, as you can see, this little ball's got some gaps in it. So what you do is you just do that. Get through the gaps, and then you just keep rolling it around until all your binding is ready to stitch on your quilt. So when we're ready to get the binding on, you've got the raw edge of your folded 2.5-inch strip, and you've got the raw edge of your quilt over here. And you're going to put these raw edges touching each other. You're then going to line this up. I use 1/4-inch seam tape, and you line that up with 1/4 inch. Now when I start my binding, I always go forward and backwards, and I always make sure my needle is down. The reason being, this is a lot of weight, and I try and keep all the weight on the table, but sometimes that doesn't always work. This is a big quilt. You want to make sure that you've got as much support as you can get. And then because I've rolled this over here, all I do now is I line this up along here, and when I need this, I just unroll it as I go along, and you'll see what I mean. And as we get towards the end over here for our mitered corner, I'll show you a few tricks of what I like to do. Okay, so as we get closer to the end over here, we're going to stop. If I fold my fabric back, you can see that's the end of my fabric. I always do a little crease, so I'm going to stop 1/4 inch ahead of that fold mark. And you can see I'm there. And then what I do is I lift my foot, I rotate my fabric at a diagonal, and you can see the point of the fabric over the point in the edge of the quilt there. I put my foot down and I sew off the end. Now the advantage of doing that is I've got my perfect 45-degree there, and you've got your 1/4 inch line there. So when I fold my fabric like that and then down, when you fold your fabric like that, in theory, you should then have a perfect mitre at that point. You're lining these two pieces of fabric up here and that up there, and that over there. And that'll show that you should, in theory, have the perfect mitered corner to bind your quilt. Now with binding, I always think if you can get 2 of the 4 quilt points done, you're doing well. And what I'll do here is I'll just show you what I mean, is when I fold this back, that is the perfect little miter all ready for you. And then if you're doing single binding, you fold that in and you fold that down and you've got a pretty good miter. Don't be upset with yourself if you don't get a good miter. Just enjoy the process. It's all meant to be fun. And there we go. We do that for the whole quilt. And we're now going to come, you can see this is where we started. We're coming to the end over here. Don't stitch too close. Just gives you a little bit of wiggle room if you need to manipulate stuff. So I try and go maybe about 20 inches gap in between. And then I go forwards and backwards over there. So we've got our flappy bits over here. So what you're looking to have is you've got these 2 pieces here which are going to overlap. Now this is a 2.5-inch ruler. There are many different brands that you can get. So you've got 2 options. You can either use your 2.5-inch ruler like that. You fold the fabric over there and then you know that that's going to be where you cut it off and you're going to do the seam there. Now if you don't have one of these rulers, a really simple thing to do is to take a piece of the fabric you're already stitching and you put that on top of it there. You pull this towards it and you fold it back like that. So there's 2 different ways of doing it, but all you need to know is you need an overhang of the top to the bottom of 2.5 inches. And when you get that and you're happy, you just simply cut that apart and you're now ready to put these 2 together. Now, often I get these put the wrong way round and I do it wrong. So I always do it like this. I take a pin to double check that I've got it going in the right direction. And I put it in the direction I'm going to be sewing in. And then I pull it flat to check it's going to work. And it is. So that's a good little tip on how to do that because often we get this wrong. So I know I'm sewing from that corner to this corner and I'm lining this up and then just give that a nice little fold and you can check you've got a stitch line along there and you line that stitch point up there with a start and that with the end and you sew along there. Now, do not trim this off until you've checked you've got it right. And as you can see, I have. So when I've checked that it's right, make sure you cut there. Ooh. Make sure you cut it all off. And there we go. Now when I do this, I always give this a really good press with my fingers to make sure it's nice and flat. I pull this taut and I sew all the way through to the other side, which we've already done. And there we go. We have now bound our quilt. If you're ready to do this, you can now go and fold this back and hand stitch it, and your quilt will then be finished. And I'll show you it all in a few moments. And at last, we've got our big reveal of the Vlieseline Quilt-a-Long for 2024. Thank you very much for joining us on this Quilt-a-Long series. I am so proud to have been chosen by Vlieseline to do this project with you, and I really cannot wait to see all your finished products. Please make sure you share them on all of our social media platforms. We can't wait to see them, and we look forward to seeing you again doing this project next year. Bye-bye.